Welcome to the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast, the show dedicated to bring you the news from the oil patch deep in the heart of Texas, with your hosts, Ryan Ray and Josh Shelton.
And we're back with the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast. This is episode 115. 115. I'm your host, Josh Shelton, my friend and co-host, Ryan Ray. Ryan, it's been a week's getting started off pretty good, man. How's your day going so far?
Good. Everything's going well. Busy week. A lot of news last week about the DUCs. We're going to have on some DUC discussion today, so that should be of interest. But first, Josh, we have a quick note to thank our sponsor, which is the insurance brokers. We're living in 2019, Josh. We talk about this a lot. Want to be able to connect with people, use technology. The insurance brokers are doing that. If you want to get a digital quote, you can do that without having to get on the phone, wait online, stuff like that. I know these people, they've been listening to the shows I was telling you offline for years now, basically some of our first listeners. And they said, we heard you had a sponsorship available. We want to put our name out there. So if you're wanting commercial, personal, life, whatever it may be, you need to talk to the folks at the insurance brokers. You can find them on Instagram at _insurance_brokers or on Twitter at @theinsurancebrk. We'll link to both of those in the show notes. Be sure to tell them we sent you. Josh, a lot going on, man. A lot of crazy news out there, and it's it's an interesting time to put it mildly. We do have one thing to note. I know we've had some listeners who mentioned about meeting up with us, and we are looking to go up to Tulsa here pretty soon. So if you have any Tulsa listeners, you need to hit us up on LinkedIn and let us know so Josh and I can get you on the schedule. I think next couple of weeks we'll be up there. So just let us know, and we'll be sure to pencil that into our schedule when we're in Tulsa.
That's right. And I may be heading out to Midland again this week. So if anybody's listening, reach out to me. I'm not sure exactly what day it's going to be yet, but I met up with one listener.
Nate's going to get this. You're presuming Nate's going to get this out this week, so don't.
Yeah.
Assuming this is the week of the 29th, so assuming Nate gets it out this week and all that, then they might get in hold of you.
Well, I'm excited about the meeting we have coming up, and just a little bit talking about the DUCs. But our good friend David, he actually released a couple articles actually. One was about some information in the Gulf, but the other was about U.S. shale and basically the challenging times that the industry is facing. He's been in the industry for a long time. I think he dated back to 1987 with the job that he had. And he just mentioned how the landscape for the oil and gas industry has shifted. Basically, each decade, there's just a different roll call of major oil and gas folks. And it was interesting to read through the article to get some of his perspective on how he's seen the industry change so much over the last 25 or 30 years. And he actually mentioned meeting with an old friend, Ron, and I know you had met with him at one point. You think he's talking about you there?
I'm young. I'm not old. I'm just kidding, David. I'm just kidding. No. It wasn't me. It was not me. So no. I don't know. It was a good piece though. He has I think the thing that kind of takeaway for me, Josh, was part of what he's alluding to here, and I know we have some listeners, like our buddy Speakner, who's kind of on one side of things, saying, "Hey, this is going to end very badly for oil and gas companies," and you have some folks on the other side who are saying, "Hey, drill, baby, drill. It doesn't matter," and you have folks who are kind of everywhere in between there. I think, if I understand what David's point is, more or less, is that it goes up, it goes down, and that's part of the market process that companies, and if you go read the piece, and Nate will link to it in the show notes, if you go read the piece, he talks about their company, where they were, they went through kind of a downtime, even though it wasn't kind of expected, and then they revamped and kind of changed positions. I do think where we're at with the shale companies today is a little bit different. And part of that is because there's so many of them, and you have so many names out there that people can kind of track. Where 10, 15 years ago, the market dynamics are different. The thing he touched on, and I thought was important that we need to remind ourselves is, and we've talked about this on the show a couple times, is that this fracking shale boom industry is still new. And I think a lot of the ways that we talk about the news and how the news used to react, how the news react now, all those things I think are fundamentally different, and we're still kind of walking our way through how that's going to change things. And so if you do have these fracking companies that go out of business, they start to go bankrupt, and it goes back to like it was, which I don't think it will, but it goes back to like it was 20 years ago. Okay, that's one thing. But if we kind of go this ebb and flow of companies that are getting bought, they're getting sold, they're going through bankruptcy, whatever, I think that the market is still trying to grasp around that. And it goes to this other issue, which is the crude quality right now today. But I think that's something that's kind of tied in there loosely that folks aren't really hitting on. But I thought it was a good piece just to kind of remind us that, hey, this is up, this is bad. Now, the only thing I would say is, again, when you're reading oil and gas articles, you got to remember their perspective. David's talking about from a very big perspective. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay for the guy on the ground who's out there working on a rig. It might not be very good for him if some of this if it kind of works out in a certain manner. So got to keep that in mind as well.
Ryan, you mentioned those crude quality. Any listeners out there that knows much about it, I really want to get some information articles and some guys to come on talk about that, because they were supposed to be building some refineries here that could handle the lighter, sweeter crude, because we were having to ship it over for them to process it at some point. And I read an article that had a different take on that, and I forget where I read it. It's probably been 2 weeks. They were talking about different crude qualities and how, don't want to go into it too much, but we need to, I think next week I'm going to try, I don't know if we got guests coming next week or not, but I want to try to jump into that, because there's all sorts of things that are tied into those, the crude quality and what we're having to do and ship it and mixing it and all that it could change things a little bit, because right now the Permian producing a lighter, sweeter crude is making things a little difficult for us to be able to process all in-house, if I understand the situation clearly. And Sergio Chapa, he recently released a article. Saltwater disposal wells make up nearly 1/3 of new well permits. We've talked a little bit about this, and I forget the county where they were having a little bit of seismic activity, where they started moving northwest away from this particular county. But there's a lot of great information in here. Obviously, saltwater disposals are a huge part of the drilling permits and have been for at least the past year. But there's lots of good information too about Permian Basin. Midland Exploration Company, Summit Petroleum, they're about to do 6 new horizontal wells in Upton County, and several others in here. I think there's a conventional wells that are getting ready to I think Dallas Oil Company, that they're getting ready to do some stuff too. So
yeah, that's Dominion. Dominion's going to do that. I just don't know why Sergio's got to throw the Barnett under the bus. Where we're at, Josh. It's almost like when he left the San Antonio Business Journal, now he's at the Houston Chronicle. He's always picking on us folks in the Barnett. All of a sudden, he left us alone for so long, but now it's like every week he's got to point out that we're not drilling, and I kind of take it personal there, Sergio, to be quite honest with you. He did put in here, though, that Atmos is looking at an underground storage well in Henrietta, south of Henrietta in Clay County, and so that would be interesting to see how that pans out. We worked on a storage facility years ago. God, I can't remember. It's probably been 10 years ago in Northern Louisiana. And they were going to go in there and put a storage facility in anyways. And the prices were so low, they were going to buy it, store it, and then sell it, and prices got higher. And the prices stayed so low for so long that they'd eventually cancel the project because they never figured that they were going to be able to do it. But yeah, Sergio, once again, has his drilling report. And this is, it's good stuff. And if you're looking for business development leads, Sergio's giving them out to you for free. Look at that. Man of the people.
Yeah, mentioned those drilling permits. There was 286 filed in Texas. 95 were filed by 50 separate companies seeking to develop new injection wells for oil field wastewater. So just to give some numbers there. A article came out this week that I thought was pretty interesting. This is from a study done in Colorado, I believe. Colorado School of Public. So I looked at about 4 or 5 articles. It was first released in a Denver article, but it's Colorado School of Public Health. They did a study that showed that people that are living in or near where drilling activity is heavy have a 40 to 70% higher chance of birthing children with congenital heart defects. So obviously we want to cover any kind of news that's coming out on the environmental side. Ryan, the thing that stands out to me with some of this is, first of all, Colorado, we had some lawyers that were on, and we talked about the bill they were trying to pass that prohibited any oil and gas activity within so many feet of schools, hospitals, daycares, where people are, any type of public place. And that state has also produced a study citing that if you're pregnant and you have a baby and you live within so many feet of where someone is drilling oil and gas, that your chances of having a baby with congenital heart disease is 40 to 70% higher. Now, I just want to draw attention to the fact that it's not a coincidence that these two things are coming out of the same place. And it makes you wonder which one's coming first. Is this an issue where someone is painting the target around the arrow and they are trying to support their proposal to stop oil and gas with a scientific study, or is it vice versa? Or is it the scientific study that's coming first and it's leading them to want to prohibit oil and gas? That's just one thing. Ryan, you had a couple of thoughts that you mentioned offline that I thought were interesting as well. But it's definitely something to keep note of for us in the oil and gas industry of what's going on behind the scenes and what people are supposing to be the case and putting on as reasons for trying to prohibit oil and gas drilling.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Josh and I are not saying that the study is right or wrong. We don't know. I think a lot of times when you look at these studies, it just actually leads to more questions than it does anything else. And one of the things I was talking, and I have not read the complete study, so we'll link to it in the show notes for you guys to go check it out. You can actually, it's in the article. We'll click through the article to the actual study and go read it. But just reading through the article at bits and pieces here, one of the questions I have is, if it seems, again, from what I could detect, first off, these are Colorado wells from 2005 to 2011. One of the things I was wondering about was if you were to compare this increased rate of heart defects in babies in these oil and gas wells, how does that compare to somewhere like Los Angeles, where for years and years and years you've kind of had a smog problem, or Johannesburg, South Africa, where there's a lot of smog down there, or maybe somewhere near a coal mine where there's a lot of air pollution? So are we comparing this from you live near oil and gas wells, and so there's a lot of dust, there's a lot of stuff going in the air. We all acknowledge that. There's no denying that. Are you comparing that to babies that are kind of born in fresh, clean air where there's nothing around? Is it kind of outside the city limits? Or are you comparing it to other areas that would have high, emissions from a lot of different things? And I think that's kind of important, because if you're saying that compared to a heavily, whatever the most, whatever the smoggiest, I don't know, most smog, whatever the word is there, the most smog city in the world, or near a coal mine, if you're saying, hey, the heart defects are higher than those areas, then we do need to step back and go, okay, we're kind of comparing apples to apples. If you're comparing it to kind of a suburban city, then I don't think that's a necessarily apples to apples comparison. It is important to note, but it's not necessarily the most important factor that I would want to know. I want to know how it compares to other areas where you would expect to have a lot of emissions. The other thing is, when you look at these studies, and I can't speak to all of this one. It's a lot of, if the listeners go listen, there's a lot of jargon in there. But the other thing is, usually in my experience, Josh, when I've looked at these studies that track human activity, whether it's a diet related or health related, they usually do not factor in a lot of variables on human activity. So they may not be tracking alcohol consumption, drug use, exercising. There's a lot of things. If you think about the differences between Josh and I, or us, me and a listener, there's a lot of different things that we're doing on a daily basis that will impact how we live our lives. And so when you bring that into these studies, I don't know how much, how deep they're going. If I read correctly, it's only 5 things that they're actually studying, which was, I can't find it now. It's on sex, maternal smoking, race, and ethnicity were the 4 things, I guess it was. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. So, maternal smoking, obviously something you want to factor in there, but I don't know if they're alcohol consumption, drug use, exercise, and I don't know how those things play into birthing defects in general, but I'm saying if you're not tracking those things, then those things could be going on in these people as well. So it's important. I'm glad we put it up. People need to go, they need to read it, and I think it's good for us to read this, go, okay, there could be a problem here. Now we just need to ask more questions to figure out, is this actually something to be concerned with, or is it just kind of like you're saying, a potential hit job?
Yeah, and that's I think one of the main reasons I wanted to bring it to the attention of some of the listeners is this bill that they're trying to propose in Colorado. I don't think we've seen the end of it. I imagine that next election cycle we're going to see something similar come up, and understanding that this is going to be the direction that certain groups want to take the country and want to take energy in general. It's good for us to know what they're using and what right or wrong, true or false, what they're doing, what they're saying is the case. And I think you made great points there, Ryan, just about different criteria that need to be included in studies. You know, if you did something like studies about folks that live close to hospitals, and you did studies about that everywhere, you may find that the people that live closer to hospitals have higher levels of something. That doesn't
stress.
Yeah,
they might be, but because they hear the ambulance all the time.
Yeah,
you know,
you got ambulances there. You're right next to the hospital, which is going to be very busy areas. Typically, you don't have, peaceful neighborhoods that are safe and secluded next to hospitals, right? So usually that's going to be further away. So there's all sorts of things that are included being near a hospital that don't indicate, socioeconomic status and all these other factors that play into location where you're at. I mean, even if you're by an oil and gas well, chances are you're not going to be at the highest end of the city, where more expensive houses are and stuff like that. So there's all sorts of stuff that you need.
And I think that's right, Josh. And it's easy to acknowledge that if they're driving up down them well roads and there's dust and there's diesel, that it's not that we were saying we don't believe that could cause some kind of problem, that health problem. That's I could definitely see an adult living next to a dusty road having allergy problems or something like that. So it could have impacts on babies being born and defects. And I think it's reasonable to assume that there could be something behind this. I think it's also reasonable to presume that maybe the study doesn't go far enough to help us because, as we said before on the show over and over again, if there is something that is that the industry is doing that's harmful, we want to try to fix that. I think all we're saying is that when you look at these studies, it probably doesn't go far enough to actually answer those questions.
Yep, agreed. Well, there's an article that came out that talks about New Mexico state setting oil production record. So New Mexico produced nearly 246 million barrels of oil in 2018, which was up 40% from the previous year. So no surprise here. New Mexico has been pretty hot with oil production. They are, it was 86 million barrels in 2012, so you can see 246 million last year. And just the productivity that's coming in the state is bringing all sorts of financial success to the state. And it's just great overall for New Mexico. I think it's good to see this. They make a couple of comments here, no signs of it abating. New Mexico is still going pretty strong as far as I can tell this year, Ryan.
It's good for New Mexico. A lot of tax dollars being generated in New Mexico, so I'm sure the government's definitely happy about that.
Third from the bottom paragraph, the fracking boom leaves the state in the happy position of deciding what to do with the $1 billion plus budget surplus, which is a direct consequence of oil and gas development. So there's a lot more money than that put in, but there's actually a $1 billion surplus. And given that, this writer says that it remains a relatively poor state, and it's unfortunate the state government seems to want to look the oil and gas gift horse in the mouth by pursuing fantasies like 100% renewable goals. So definitely some frustration on the writer's part.
It's just your friendly reminder that we're ran by idiots. That's just it's just your friendly reminder that we're ran by idiots. Yeah, I've seen some of those, and I don't follow the New Mexico political scene, kind of like I do here in Texas, but I've seen some of the stuff there, and I'm sure you got some listeners who follow it a little closer, and it's weird. It's like, man, you guys really don't. Again, from an outsider's perspective, we've got a listener that can hit us up on the show, but it's really weird. It does seem like they're almost frustrated with the industry, and I'm sure there's some legitimate complaints that the industry's done some stuff that could be frustrating to frustrate them. But it's like, kid, $1 billion surplus. Not to count all the jobs that are being created, all the revenue that's coming in. So it's crazy.
Last thing, Ron, for the roundup, Japan's Osaka Gas is set to buy Sabine Oil for $610 million. So this is a Japanese company, Osaka. It said today that it's going to buy the U.S. shale Sabine Oil and Gas for $610 million. And I believe Sabine owns 175,000 net acres in East Texas, 1,200 wells, which produce 1.7 million tons of shale gas. So interesting to see what some of these foreign companies are looking to do here in Texas. Something definitely to track.
Last week we had the story about the Chinese with the longest lateral. And this week we got a Japanese company buying Sabine Oil. So there we go.
All right, we have a special guest on today. This is Mr. Ted Hall. He's with Kayrros. Ted, we appreciate you coming on the show today, man. Glad to have you.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Great. So you are a senior market analyst at Kayrros. So kind of walk us through, we're going to talk about the DUCs, we know, but what does a senior market analyst do? What all services do you guys kind of offer? Because you're at least for this show, we haven't talked about you guys a lot. So 30,000 foot, who are you guys and what do you do there before we get into the DUC discussion?
Sure. So Kayrros is a tech company. So it's two very separate questions. So Kayrros is a tech company that creates alternative data sets using new technologies. So as far as the oil market's concerned, we're using satellite data, geolocation data to create empirical data sets to track what's going on in the market. And so what that means for me as a market analyst focused on the oil market is I take those data sets and help customers understand what we're looking at and help generate stories from that.
Okay. And so last week there was a story that came out about the DUCs or lack thereof DUCs, some might say. So let's kind of set the table like this. First off, what is the normal methodology when people are talking about the DUCs that they are that they're looking at? So when they look at the DUC data from the EIA, how does that data get to the EIA and how is it reported? And then what are you guys looking at and what are you guys saying that's different from what the API or the EIA might be saying?
Right. So my understanding, at least as far as how the EIA approaches this, they're using Frac Focus as their main source. So they scrape that data from Frac Focus to build up their drilling and completion information. So the problem with that is the reporting of Frac Focus is relatively lagged. So as the EIA continues to get in more drilling information, but not enough completions information, it creates this artificial DUC inventory. So the difference between what they do and what we do, so they're scraping Frac Focus and that's the end of the line. That's what then they build analysis around that. For us, that's our starting point. So we scrape Frac Focus, drilling permits, data from the state and railroad commission, and that's when we start monitoring. So we scrape the permits, we know where to start monitoring. So using satellites, we get a couple reads a week with optical and radar satellites. So they'll pass over a well site. We're monitoring more than 75,000 permitted well locations every single month. So we'll see the pad get cleared. We'll see the drilling rig arrive on site. We'll see it leave. That's when we mark it a drilled and completed well. And then we'll see the frac crews arrive and we'll mark that completed in progress. And we see the frac pumps leave. And that's when we mark it a completed well. So the methodology is pretty simple, but it provides a real-time look at what's going on in the oil patch.
Okay, and this morning I actually got tagged on a post with someone from your company, and there were some questions on there, so we'll kind of touch on that. One of the things that has brought up a couple times was on the multi-pads. How are y'all handling those? Because I think there was some question about are you able to actually capture the multi-pad data as accurately as maybe a single drill?
Sure. So that's actually the biggest assumption that goes into this is around timing. So while we can measure, it's almost a binary indicator whether there's frac pumps on site or not. That's where we have to determine based on how long the fracs have been on site, how many wells they've completed. So So say the frac crew's been on. So we know they've drilled 10 wells. We know 10 wells are permitted. We know they've been long enough to drill 10 wells. So the frac pumps arrive on site. We're counting based on historical data, historical completion efficiency, how long it's going to take them to complete those wells. So if they're on the site long enough to complete all 10, then we'll mark all 10 completed. If they're on there half the time it would take, we would estimate 5. So that is the most likely source of error if we have any. We've determined we have roughly a 98% accuracy on those.
Okay. And so let's just to help me understand here. So let's just set the table. Essentially, you're saying that if it's we'll use false numbers here to keep the math easy. There's 10 potential spots on one pad, and that takes a month to do. They're out there 2 weeks, so you know that there's a 2 week. There should be out there 2 weeks longer. So therefore, theoretically, 4 to 6, 5, some of that range is what they did. Then how do you monitor that to see when those next 5 are captured? Is it just you're running an algorithm on top of the imagery as it's going over that well pad for now until whenever it's captured, or how do you make sure that you get those next 5 when they're done?
Well, that's where we're continuously monitoring everything that's going into frac focus, everything that's going into the states. So if we see something different show up in the data, we will adjust our data set. So most of the time that's validated. Sometimes the APIs, like which particular well out of the 10 permitted might be different. So we might have to adjust the actual number we've assigned. But anyone monitoring the patch from an operator perspective or from a larger commodity perspective, that's usually not a huge deal. But yeah, we're constantly pulling in the data. I mean, that's the starting point for everything, all the analysis we're doing. So if we see a change, we change it, but that's usually pretty small.
Okay. And then let me just backtrack to something you said about frac focus. If I'm understanding the kind of the frac focus thing is you're on some level, it sounds like you're saying that frac focus is right, but the time at what the time in which they're right may be further back in history, and you guys are a lot closer to real time. Is that kind of what you're distinguishing yourselves from frac focus?
That's what we thought. So when we started building this product, we had this was an idea that came from our equity trading customers. They just wanted a better idea faster about what operators were doing. But that was the big surprise. And we actually got into the data. It looked like some of them, especially smaller, especially private operators, weren't reporting at all. So it remains to be. So most of our study, at least what you saw publicly, was about 2018 data. So it remains to be seen whether they eventually are going to report those to frac focus. We've seen an increase in reporting on the Railroad Commission since we first started studying this back in February, but frac focus is still pretty lax. So it looks like they're not reporting at all. So especially if you're looking at an aggregate standpoint, like the actual level of activity in the basin, that it looks like it's vastly unreported, which is why you get the inflated DUC numbers. But on an individual operator standpoint, if you're looking at a single operator trying to monitor what they're doing, most publicly traded, especially larger operators, are reporting pretty faithfully to frac focus. Now, not within a reasonable time frame, which is why this still has value if you're studying these names. But they are reporting faithfully, and they're always report faithfully to the SEC.
Okay, that's great, because that's one of the questions I wanted to ask specifically was about investors or people who are following these companies that are publicly traded, how that's being reported. So if you take the data, now obviously all these companies that are drilling in the Permian Basin aren't publicly traded companies, but a large percentage of the main drillers are publicly traded. Could you not just take that data and compare it to your data to see? And maybe it's one of your checks is, are you just taking that data from a Pioneer, from an Exxon or XTO, whatever, or an Apache, and then kind of comparing it to your data to see if it lines up? Or do you run your analysis and then kind of use that as a check? Because there's 2 different ways to look at how you could do that interpretation of the data there.
So as we were developing the product, the early validations we did were around what was being reported to the states and frac focus. So, that especially when you're building something in hindsight, you don't have to worry about timeliness. So we take this historical well completion data and then validate that against what we were seeing in satellite imagery. But to those validations, again, exactly like you said, those are big publicly traded operators that are reporting faithfully to frac focus, faithfully to states, and faithfully to the SEC. But when we started applying that across the basin, we're seeing every single public and private well. When we started applying that broadly across the basin to every well drilled and completed, that's when we started to see the inconsistencies, especially among small private operators.
So if I'm following all of this, and it's kind of a it's a lot to put together, and I hope I'm sure the listeners will have a lot of things to go, Ryan, you missed this, but I'm trying to put together the best I can here. If I'm following along here, it sounds like what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you were to just sit down and listen to quarterly calls, read SEC filings from a Pioneer, we'll use Pioneer, they're not specifically, just to be clear, there's no I'm just picking it up as a random name. So if you follow Pioneer, Pioneer is, for the most part, or Company X, we'll call them, is faithfully reporting to the SEC and to their investors what's going on. However, because of the lag of the data that they turn into Frac Focus and other agencies, that you have conflicting data. So if someone were to sit down without the satellite imagery, this would be kind of where I'm getting at, without the satellite imagery, and just went to the publicly traded companies and read their reports and compared that to the Frac Focus and other agencies, there would be some discrepancy there. Maybe not as much as what you guys are reporting, but that alone would show some discrepancy just to validate. So that would be a separate validation of what you guys are saying without your data is all. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the most part, publicly traded company X is reporting faithfully, and it's in the SEC. They're reporting faithfully in their company guidance.
Mm-hmm.
What the biggest delta is, and this is across the board, especially when we're talking the shorter term, come in exactly what they're reporting to Frac Focus and to the states. So anyone who's like if you're trading company X, then you care about what they're doing in the meantime.
Right.
And if you a lot of the customers we talked to, a lot of the traders in New York, equity traders, that's what they were using. They knew most of them knew that the reporting was lagged. They knew it was incomplete, but they felt like they had enough to guess when it was wrong. And what we've discovered is that may not be the case. And there are a few examples, and I can't name names.
Sure.
A few examples of larger publicly traded companies that aren't reporting faithfully on a quarterly basis. Now they are reporting to the SEC. They're not doing anything, too sketchy, but they're not reporting to Frac Focus in a timely manner at all.
Okay, so let's break those down. We've named off 3 different agencies. We've kind of with one, we've kind of thrown out a very wide net. So you've got the SEC, you've got Frac Focus, and you've got kind of other state and local government agencies. You said, why is it that SEC is getting the best data, the most accurate data, the most current data, whereas Frac Focus and these state and local agencies aren't getting that? Is it the regulations aren't as strict? Is it the punishment's not as severe, whereas the SEC could come in and kind of lay the hammer on you? What is it about the SEC that makes them get the best data?
I mean, well, all we can do is speculate about the reasons why operators aren't reporting faithfully, but I think it's clear that misleading the SEC is a really big deal, and that it makes sense to me that they wouldn't do that. And again, we don't think operators are doing anything nefarious. It just seems to be that the cost of and this is why it correlates with smaller producers. The cost of compliance seems to be much greater than the cost of failing to report. So if Frac Focus doesn't have any enforcement power, if the state commissions don't enforce, even if they wait 2 years to report, if there's no enforcement mechanism, then why would you report? Especially if you're not publicly traded, you don't have any kind of headline risk with not reporting.
Okay, let's see here. Let's kind of go back into the data just a little bit. You say and I don't remember where I saw this at. I've got 3 different articles from stuff that's going on from last week. But there was a quote, or at least I think it was a quote from you guys, that said that basically that if you just take the DUC number and the debate over that out of the equation, you do affirm, if I remember correctly, the volume, if you will. So the amount of oil that we're saying that's on the market is actually there. It's just that it's taking more wells to get it there than was previously thought. Is that correct?
Exactly. So everything we see in production numbers out of the EIA and eventually out of the state, the state reporting is still pretty lagged. But everything you see in the EIA monthly, those revisions are only maybe 10,000 barrels a day every month. So production numbers we think are correct. This is really just when we step back and study, what productivity per well on a basin level, those numbers are way off because the EIA is using the Frac Focus data to determine those numbers.
So how much does this impact the cost to produce a barrel of oil or to drill a well or the various things that go in with this? Because if you're saying that there's more wells that are actually being drilled than we thought, that could actually mean that it's costing more to do this shale basin in the Permian Basin exploration than we previously thought.
Well, I mean, on a per well basis, it doesn't change anything. It's still to to get the frac pumps in there and to get the crews in there, that costs the same.
Right.
But as analysts looking on an aggregate level of a basin, if you're using a publicly available completion number to determine the amount of capex that was put into that basin to get that production number, you're going to be way off. Your assumption of the cost per well is going to be really underestimated.
And so, let's just take that. So, how close is your data, do you guys would believe, to what the actual number is? So obviously you're not monitoring every pad in the Permian on a second by second basis, and then once you get the data, you got to analyze it and figure out what it means and all this stuff. So how far is, so we said that there's a severe lag with frac focus and the government agencies. The SEC is pretty close, but it's not all encompassing. You guys are trying to package all that together. So how close do you think your guys' data is to the real time?
It's spectacularly close. It's amazingly good. When I came, I came from EOG originally, so I was running market analysis at EOG, and our holy grail about trying to figure out production forecasting was getting a good completions number, and it just didn't exist. So when they came to me with this product, it was just a slam dunk as far as making analysis better. So with our methodology, we're monitoring every single permitted well site in the basins we cover, so we're really not missing anything. A misfiled permit, that could be a miss, but that's exceedingly rare. So when it comes down to how close we are to reality, we've determined, and this is based on historical frac focus and state commission data, we have roughly 98% accuracy on well completions. So it really is as good as it could possibly get. And the only thing that we could just get faster. Right now we release our completions numbers 2 weeks after the end of the month.
Okay. So one more question, just kind of step back from the Permian. On the report that I'm looking at you guys sent over to us, thank you for that, by the way. I see the Williston, Anadarko, DJ, Eagle Ford, and the Permian are all listed here on monthly horizons. Completed wells by basin prior 12 months is figure 1 is the chart for reference. What are you seeing outside the Permian? Or is the outside the Permian data the same? Is it the same percentage of maybe lapses or not necessarily the same problems? You're not seeing the same issues. Let's just talk just at a high level at these other plays and basins. What are you guys seeing there?
Sure. I think activity across in aggregate is pretty flat year on year, which to get, not big production growth numbers, but pretty substantial is impressive. And I think it speaks to the efficiency of the wells. In the Eagle Ford, we've seen some declines. In Oklahoma has been really noisy. We saw it stay pretty stable, and then it fell off pretty quickly in a single month. But across the basins on a month-to-month basis, it's actually pretty noisy. But as far as trends go, we see completions are pretty flat year on year across the board.
Okay. So final thing for you, and I want to ask this as nicely as I can, but I think we need to ask it because when we started looking at having you guys on, we asked some other people about their opinion, and they said, "Hey, this is a PR grab. This is a company that's trying to get their name out there. You were gracious enough to come on, answer our questions. Obviously, there's probably other questions that we didn't get to, but I want you to kind of set the tone for people who might go, you know what, this is a company trying to get their name out there. They're trying to sell data and they're trying to make a big splash. What would you say to people who think that this is just a PR grab, if you will?
I would hope that they'd reach out to us and look at the data. It is something we would stand behind. It's something that, when Andrew Gould went to the press with our press release, he was the biggest critic, and he held our feet to the fire about what we were putting out and made us double and triple check everything we were doing. But it's something that I would stand behind. What we're doing is different, and anyone else talking about completions at best is making an estimate about at least what's happening today. And we're taking actual photos, taking actual measurements, what's going on in the basins. So, obviously, this is a good way to get attention and to get people to call us. But if any doubters, feel free to reach out because we've got the data to back it up.
Okay. And just for the record, you guys have been very gracious in coming on and sending us some of the information to look at. Obviously, nothing too classified or top secret, but we do appreciate that. We do appreciate you coming on. There were no restrictions on things that we couldn't ask or things like that. And that's at least a good sign of transparency from our standpoint, is that you didn't say, hey, don't ask about this or don't mention this. And so we do appreciate that. We appreciate the time. Where can folks, if they want to check out this data, they want to maybe talk to you guys about what data sets you have or whatever, how do they reach out to you for a consultation or whatever the process is? Why don't you go ahead and lay that out for folks, Ted?
Yeah, sure. They can come to us on our website. That's probably the easiest way, at Kayrros.com. Kayrros is Kayrros. Not everyone always gets that right. And they can reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Ted Hall. So that's a pretty easy way to do it. And beyond well completions, we started out doing storage monitoring. So we monitor 90% of floating roof storage capacity in the world. We have week-on-week Cushing monitoring. We monitor refinery outages, flaring in OPEC countries. We're really, our coverage in the oil market's really broad. So if you're trading the market at an equity or commodity level, feel free to reach out.
Okay, and thanks again for coming on. We will link to the website again, which is kayrros.com. That's Kayrros.com. Link to that in the show notes for folks to get in there and connect with you guys. I'm sure we'll have some questions and comments about this episode because it is kind of a culture shock, and I think people are definitely going to want to look through the data themselves, or go back and look at the SEC data versus Frac Focus and the other government stuff, and kind of at least validate what you're saying on some of that level. I think that's a great starting spot for some listeners just to go and compare some of that data to see what's going on there, and then obviously reach out to you guys. So Ted, thank you so much. We hope to have you on again in the future to talk more about this issue or whatever else is going on. So thank you for your time today, sir.
Anytime. Thanks, guys.
Well, big thanks to Ted Hall for coming on the show today, discussing the ducks. Great conversation. Really appreciate him taking time to join us today. Ryan, with that, I think that wraps us up for today, man.
Yep, and I've said before, I'm kind of a duck agnostic. I'm not really sure what to think about all this stuff, but I'm curious what the listeners think. The ducks seem to get folks fired up when we talk about the ducks. So 318-599-9192. 318-599-9192. You can send us a text or leave us a voicemail, or textoilgaspodcast.com. You can go on there and send us a note. Yeah, good stuff, and we'll be sure to. I'm sure there'll be plenty more discussion about it. We've reached out to Drilling Info. Hopefully, they will come on at some point and talk about it, or I don't know who else. Maybe the some other group would want to come talk about the ducks. It's definitely got a lot of traction though. So thanks again to the listeners. Earlier we said Nate might not have the show out this week. He got mad at me and claimed that he would quit if I quit harassing him publicly on the podcast. So Nate will have the podcast out speedily, quickly, vitally importantly. I don't know any other words to say. So Nate will be on his job this week, doing it well for once. It'd be nice to see that. So we're excited to see Nate do his job. And until next time, keep flying.